Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I'm president of Interfaith Alliance, and we're glad that you've joined us today. We have the extraordinary opportunity to talk with Amy Spitalnick from Integrity First for America. And Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Integrity First for America.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack, and thanks to everyone for watching. Integrity First for America is a small civil rights nonprofit committed to holding those accountable who threaten the principles of our democracy. And these days, that could feel like a pretty tall order. What that translates to in reality is that we are the organization supporting Sines v. Kessler, which is the landmark federal lawsuit brought against the 24 neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and hate groups responsible for the Charlottesville violence nearly 2.5 years ago, or rather over 2.5 years ago at this point. Our lawsuit was brought on behalf of 10 plaintiffs who were injured in the Charlottesville violence, students, community members, reverend, and others who over the course of that weekend were the victims of this extremist hate and violence. It takes on the individuals and groups that are truly at the center of this movement. Many names that I suspect folks will know: Richard Spencer, Identity Europa, Vanguard America, National Socialist Movement, and a whole host of other neo-Nazi and white supremacist individuals and groups. And what this suit can really do is certainly hold these individuals and groups accountable for the violence they brought to Charlottesville, but also have much larger impacts in the fight against rising white supremacy, racism, and hate. This case, when we go to trial, currently scheduled for this fall, and put on the stand these leaders and hold them accountable for the violence that they conspired to bring to Charlottesville, really has the potential not just for that accountability and justice for our plaintiffs, but to bankrupt and dismantle the leaders and groups that are at the center of this movement and that have deep connections to so many of the other vile acts of hate we've seen in recent years.
Well, that's pretty tall order for a small nonprofit, but I know you've been doing some extraordinary work on that. I want to ask you about it, but I also want to let the people know who've watched us regularly that I'm purposely not asking Amy a lot of personal stuff because, as she put it to me, Nazis. She lives a sort of low-key, under-the-radar lifestyle because, as you might imagine, there are people out to do her harm. So I just hope you're safe where you are and that you and your family and your other loved ones are doing well.
Thank you.
Amy, in these times, everybody's attention is distracted from the things that are important. What are you focusing on specifically right now, other than these unusual times we're living in?
Well, I think more so than anything for us, the last few weeks have underscored the importance and the urgency of the work that we're doing. We've seen firsthand how white supremacists and other extremists have tried to exploit this moment to spread their hate, their terror, their violence, and disinformation. And so starting, frankly, months ago at this point, when the coronavirus was sort of an initial sort of glimmer in our eyes, we saw how white supremacists started to blame it on white anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Clearly, the Jews had to be behind this. And we've only seen that grow in recent weeks, in which you see them connecting it to, for example, replacement theory, which is the idea that Jews are the puppeteers, the masters who are orchestrating the replacement of the white race. That's the same ideology we saw firsthand in Charlottesville, where they chanted, "Jews will not replace us." We saw it in so many of these other attacks, from Pittsburgh to El Paso, Poway, Christchurch, and everything in between. And now we see it being used here as a means to try to lay blame for coronavirus.
Yeah, I was astonished to see the email that you sent out talking about the attempts to weaponize COVID-19 and direct it at the Jewish community.
Exactly. And so we've seen also a number of these white supremacists, unsurprisingly, try to take these vile conspiracy theories and turn it into action, which is not a new phenomenon. That's something that we've seen time and time again. But right now, during a pandemic, it's perhaps even more concerning. For example, we saw chats on Telegram, which is a social media site favored by a number of extremists, where they talked about doing just what you described, turning coronavirus into a bioweapon that they would target at Jews, law enforcement, and others. We also last week learned that a white supremacist, who is actually a member of National Socialist Movement, one of the defendants in our Charlottesville suit, tried to car bomb a hospital in Missouri that was treating coronavirus patients.
Goodness.
He died during a confrontation with the FBI last week. The fact that something like that happened in America last week and barely broke through onto anyone's radar, one speaks to the fact that extremism has sadly become a fairly regular occurrence these days, but also underscores the importance to us of making sure that in this really terrifying and critical moment, we're not losing sight of those who are trying to exploit it to further these crises we've known have existed all along.
Well, that's why we have to stay focused on something other than, or I should say in addition to, our own safety and our own well-being. Amy, you had some extraordinary good luck in pursuing this lawsuit, including the lead attorneys and what they were able to access. Can you talk about those things a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to understand that what happened in Charlottesville was not an accident. A lot of people think that perhaps these extremists went down there under the guise of protesting the removal of a Confederate statue, and violence sort of spontaneously broke out. But that's not what happened. For months in advance on social media, including on a platform called Discord, typically used by video gamers, these leaders and groups planned down to the very details of what to wear, which gluten-free bread to bring for lunch, how to sew a swastika onto a flag, and even whether they could hit protesters with cars and then claim self-defense, which is, of course, what they did. And in these chats, all of these details, all of these plans were discussed. And then they went to Charlottesville and did exactly as they had planned. In sort of a stroke of good luck, within days of the Unite the Right rally, a journalist nonprofit called Unicorn Riot released into the world a number of these chats. And those chats became the basis for our plaintiff's lawsuit, in which they so clearly lay out what we allege is a violent conspiracy, a racially motivated violent conspiracy. So this is not a case about speech. This is not a case about incitement. This is a case about actions in which our plaintiffs allege that these neo-Nazis and white supremacists planned and then executed violence. We're using a number of civil rights statutes to make the case, but one that I think is most interesting is something called the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, first passed nearly 150 years ago to protect recently freed slaves from Klan vigilante violence in the South. It's been used a number of times since, including during the Freedom Rider era, and we are using it here to go after a number of these hate groups and white supremacists that were responsible for planning and executing this violence. As one of our lead counsels, Karen Dunn, likes to say, it's pretty effective when you get to use a statute called the Ku Klux Klan Act actually against the Klan. And there are some Klan groups that are some of our defendants. So Karen and our other lead counsel, Roberta Kaplan, who many of you might know from the Windsor marriage equality case at the Supreme Court a number of years back, are leading a brilliant legal team that are tireless in this work. And if you thought a pandemic was going to slow them down in terms of holding these neo-Nazis accountable, you are mistaken, because they have been holding these extremists to account, ensuring that right now, while we're in this discovery phase of the lawsuit, while we are making sure we get all the evidence to which our plaintiffs are entitled, our legal team is tireless in holding the defendants accountable, ensuring that they turn over the evidence they're required to, ensuring that they face sanctions in cases when they have not. And in fact, a key neo-Nazi leader was thrown in jail a couple of weeks back for failing to comply with court orders in our case. And ensuring that if they destroy evidence, like we alleged just last night in a new filing that James Fields did, one of our defendants, who was the one who actually drove the car into the crowd, that if they do things like that, if they withhold or destroy evidence, as so many of our defendants have been doing, they will face very severe legal and financial consequences, never mind the major financial civil judgments that they will face at trial this fall.
So I want to ask you a question about this suit, which the answer to which I think is self-evident to me and probably to you as well, but maybe not to everyone who's watching. Of course, Jews are going to be concerned about Nazis in America. Why should the rest of America be concerned about these folks?
Yeah. Look, these guys hate everyone, and it makes clear more than anything how all of our fates are intertwined. When you look at what they did in Charlottesville, when you look at the people they targeted, it was certainly Jews, and they surrounded the local synagogue with semi-automatic weapons, chanting things like Sieg Heil and talking about torching those Jewish monsters. And that is something that, I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. The fact that something like that could happen in an American city in 2017 is still horrific to me, and should not ever become normal. But they hate all of us, and all of our fates are intertwined here. And if you think about the vile ideologies and conspiracy theories that motivate them, you see it firsthand. I mentioned replacement theory earlier, that idea that Jews are sort of controlling the replacement and orchestrating the replacement of the white race. And they believe we're doing that by elevating African Americans, Latinos, and others that they believe don't actually deserve a role in our society. We saw that play out firsthand in Pittsburgh, where the shooter there targeted a synagogue that worked with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to help refugees coming to America. And that is truly a sadly perfect encapsulation of their ideology, in which if we allow them to attack any of us, we are risking the safety and dignity of all of us. And all of our fates are intertwined in this fight.
Yeah, I think that one thing that deserves emphasizing over and again is what you've just discussed, that this replacement theory that they present, Jews will not replace us, does not mean that they believe Jews are trying to take their place in society, but that Jews are behind some massive conspiracy to replace them with people from other racial and ethnic backgrounds.
That's
And
exactly
we
right.
are, we're not the danger in and of ourselves. We're the puppet masters, for lack of a better term, who are looking to supplant what they consider to be a rightful white society in America.
And I think it's particularly important for an audience like the Interfaith Alliances to understand how faith communities have really been on the front lines here. You see that in how in the white supremacist attacks on Charleston. You saw it in Charlottesville, where they targeted the synagogue and an interfaith gathering that had to shelter in place, and attacked a line of interfaith clergy that had been peacefully protesting. You saw it in Pittsburgh, where they attacked the Tree of Life Synagogue. You saw it in Christ Church, where they attacked 2 mosques. You saw it in Poway, where they attacked a synagogue. And certainly there have been no shortage of other attacks on Sikh temples, other Muslim communities, Christian communities, Jewish communities, in various forms. And so faith communities truly are on the front lines of the fight against white supremacy. And for us, that's so important to underscore. And it's something that we have been trying to highlight and embrace in our work. In fact, on our website at integrityfirstforamerica.org, we have a clergy toolkit that folks can download, clergy of all faiths can download, and hopefully use it as a means to spark conversation, perhaps inform a sermon in their congregation about the rise of white supremacy and the fact that this case exists as a tangible means to fight back.
And I don't mind sharing with the people who are viewing and listening that you and I have been talking about creating an interfaith clergy letter with the upcoming trial in mind, to raise people's consciousness and to make sure that that the government and the defendants know that people are watching, which is really important.
Exactly.
And speaking of watching, I want to ask you a question. I suspect you'll find a little bit out of left field, but I can't think of anybody better to talk about it than you. Part of the quarantine here is binge watching. And I can't help but notice the proliferation of television programs, multi-part television programs about hunting Nazis. The Man in the High Castle did whatever it was, 4 or 5 seasons. Hunters, this program that has been getting some buzz lately, is completely about Nazi hunters. And now we have The Plot Against America, which is running on HBO, which is also about Nazis in America.
Indeed.
Can you talk about why this is such a fascination?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I haven't watched any of those, even though I dearly love many of the actors and creative folks behind them, because they feel a little too close to home. And so when I, put my computer down and turn on Netflix, it's for something hopefully a little lighter hearted these days. Although, of course, I think I will only be able to resist so long. A show about Nazi hunters in particular seems sort of too good not to try.
Mm.
But I do think that it really speaks to the fact that people who follow the zeitgeist, who follow where our culture is going, have seen firsthand that this is a dire crisis that we're facing. And even if our federal government, even if leaders in that regard aren't identifying and giving resources to fighting this crisis in the way that it deserves, the people who are following our society, who are tracking the issues that they think will resonate with people, have identified as this is one. We saw that in Black Klansman, where the film ended with footage of Charlottesville. We see it in all the shows that you just listed, and I think we're only going to see more and more in terms of Hollywood, in terms of other creatives seizing on this issue as something that is critically important to society right now, and making sure that we don't lose sight of the long history that should inform how we approach this moment. And so it's been heartening to see that. I hope that it inspires people to not just watch and remember history, but then take action now, getting involved in something like IFA, where you can tangibly, quite literally, hunt a Nazi in the modern day sense by bringing them to court and holding them accountable for their actions. And so I would really encourage everyone who's into those shows, or even not, to then take that and translate it into action by supporting IFA and supporting other organizations that are doing critical work fighting extremism.
So you anticipated my last question, which was, what could you recommend to people watching this from their homes as to something tangible that they can do in order to support this cause? And I'd like to encourage people to do that as well, to go to the integrityfirstforamerica.org website and to sign up and to be a supporter.
Exactly. And we have, actually, we just released our Seder supplement as well, which is a short resource that folks can incorporate in their Passover Seders next week, whether it's a Zoom Seder, an in-person Seder, an interfaith Seder, whatever form it takes. It's a short document that allows people to talk about this crisis of extremism and the case as a means to fight back. And it includes some new introductory language about how extremists are exploiting this moment right now. So that's on integrityfirstforamerica.org/Seder. If you go to the website under our work section, you can also find the lawsuit itself and a ton of other information there. You can find the clergy toolkit I mentioned. You can sign up for case updates. You can donate, which directly supports this case.
Great.
And the most important thing people can do right now while we're all sitting at home is just spread the word. Let people know that there are organizations, brave plaintiffs like ours, fighting back against extremism at this critical moment.
And I want to encourage people, if you do go to the website and you pull up the suit itself, it's worth spending a little time reading through it, because all of the evidence is there. And when I say evidence, I don't mean testimony of people who observed what was going on there. The actual evidence of the planning that Amy was talking about is in the lawsuit and available for public perusal. You will come away both horrified by what you read and inspired by the work that IFA is doing. Amy Spitalnick, thank you so much for being with us on Stay Home, Stay Focused. I hope that you continue to thrive as best you can in these circumstances, and that we will all see a day, perhaps not too long after the October start of this trial, when this will be a problem we can look back on rather than ahead at. Thanks for being with us, my friends. Stay home and stay focused, and be with us again next time.
Thanks so much. Stay safe.
You too.